we could have been going to Kuwait, or we could have been going to Thessaloniki, Greece. The mission was the same. We had a clear mission set, and we're gonna fulfill that mission. The context, the battlefield, the area of operation were different. And so we had to adjust our tactics to the evolving difference that we were seeing as we were executing our mission. Our mission to do good as philanthropy has not changed. The conditions for why we are here doing the work that we are doing has not changed. We can rest assured that it's going to probably be worse. And so we have to adapt our tactics. We have to adapt our approach strategies. We have to adapt who we consider partner and how we partner. Philanthropic organizations have to be more flexible. We can't walk into a community or into a situation and think we know it all. And so I think that adaptation requires a leadership agility that I just appreciate the benefit of having to land in places, literally out of an airplane on a parachute, and adjust to the conditions on the ground, because that could have been different than the 6 months worth of planning we did for that event, for that moment. And you had to adjust on the fly. Well, we have the luxury in philanthropy that not everything has to be a 5-alarm fire. We actually can plan, we can prepare, and then we can take actions, responsible actions, to continue to advance our mission. And so that's my hope as I think about where we are. But no, we don't operate in fear.
Welcome to Black Philanthropy, our stories, where each episode spotlights awesome Black and African American leaders committed to transforming lives and communities through philanthropy. These authentic conversations will inspire, challenge, and remind you are not alone. Here's your host, award-winning writer, director, and founder of Samuel and Murray, Michelle Renee Jackson.
Hello there. I am so grateful for you today. Thank you for trusting me again with your time today. And thank you for being a faithful, awesome listener. Today, our guest is Darrin Goss. Darrin Goss is the president, and he's also the CEO of Coastal Community Foundations. Darrin, we're so grateful for you today. Thank you for trusting us with your learning more about your story and for all the work that you do, particularly as a foundation leader. Okay, Darrin, so talk to us a little bit about who are you? Tell us about your journey.
I'm a fourth generation Charlestonian, and my personal story starts in a plantation in Brunswick, North Carolina, on a turpentine farm, where my third great grandfather Isaac Goss somehow made his way from Brunswick, North Carolina, and that's around the Wilmington area of North Carolina, to the federal blockade. Civil War was going on around that time, 1863 or so. And then eventually made his way down to Port Royal in Beaufort County, South Carolina, enlisted in the United States Navy, did time service on the USS New Hampshire and the USS Philadelphia, eventually got out of the military in a few years, took his wife, Margaret Oliver, moved up the coast just slightly to the Charleston area, Charleston County, Wadmalaw Island. And then eventually we migrated over to James Island, and that's where I grew up. I'm a proud son of my mother. I don't know my biological father. That's created some issues and challenges from an identity standpoint. I think that's to be revealed because I think leadership, sort of how you end up, you come from all different perspectives and vantage points. And I think that has really helped me to ground me in the work that I do and how I do that work. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I really consider myself, in terms of my journey, the beneficiary of really three things. This incredible mom who required me and my sisters and my younger brother to do the best we can with whatever opportunity we had. And she held us accountable for the things that we couldn't control. And So we could control our grades, we could control how we showed up, we could control our behavior. And so in that way, that was embedded into me, control what you can control. I was an athlete. And so I ended up winning a football scholarship to attend the college I attended, Wofford College in
Hmm.
Spartanburg. But my mom had a rule from little league through high school, and then you're required to keep your grades in college. That if I didn't maintain an A/B average, which she knew, 3.0 or better was what you needed to do to get into school. I wasn't playing football. I wasn't running track. I wasn't playing basketball. I wasn't doing any of those things. And not only did she tell me that, but she told every coach that. It's like, if you want Darrin to play, he's got to maintain his grades, and you're going to see to it with me that he does that. And so that sort of discipline and accountability is a part of who I am. And so I think if you were going to sort of summarize my journey, I got called to the ministry at a young age at 23. Um, and so I've been in ministry now for almost 22 years. Excuse me, 32 years, and have pastored three churches. I've served 10 years and almost 10 years exactly in the Army as an Army officer. I've been in the for-profit corporate sector. I've been in higher education, and now I've spent the last 17 years in nonprofit philanthropy between United Way, worldwide, and now the community foundation that I have the privilege of leading here in my hometown of Charleston, South Carolina.
Darrin, what's your mom's name?
Barbara Goss Brown, we call her the mayor of Ferguson Village
Okay, why do you call her that?
because she's been running things there for as long as I can remember.
Okay.
She's the neighborhood association president. She's served in that capacity. When the family had to move away, she came back, and now she's a fixture in that community. Cares deeply about it. So it's my mom, and then my oldest sister Jackie. When my mom was working hard and doing the things that she needed to do, Jackie's 7 years older than I am, and she was that sort of surrogate mom. And I think it falls sometimes to the eldest children, particularly girls, when parents work, to be the caregiver to their younger siblings, and she certainly was that, but also a role model. I mean, I think my love for reading and my intellectual curiosity came from my older sister Jackie, and how she would approach books, how she would do research, how she would challenge us in terms of what our thinking was. And growing up on James Island in Charleston, South Carolina, in the 70s and 80s, um, that love of reading and going to the library opened up opportunity for me to explore places in the world that I thought I'd never see, people that I had only heard about, that I became intimately familiar with through reading. So that's a part of Jackie's influence on me as well.
Darrin, one of the things that we often talk about on Black Philanthropy, Our Stories, is who we honor in the work that we do. For me, it's our enslaved ancestors. I descend from enslaved people. I'm very proud to descend from enslaved people. Samuel and Murray, our company that I run, that also produces this podcast, of course, is named in honor of our grandmother's maiden name. So we come from Mildred Samuel Armistead and Louise Murray Jackson. We're always thinking about the people that came before us that created a way for us to be here. And for so many of us, that's how we come into the space of philanthropy, is ultimately they're on our minds. And so I wondered, for you, is there anybody in your life, in your lineage, that you think of when you are doing this work of being a foundation president, that you seek to honor, be reminded of?
Yeah, there's several people, but I think if I had to choose just one, and I will never know this person or their origin, but I'm just so grateful for my ancestors that didn't jump, that didn't during the Middle Passage, that didn't leave the boat, right? That stayed in there, not knowing where they were going and what would happen to them. And to me, that's a bit of courage, and that's a bit of, I believe, what sort of drives so many of us is that we have ancestors that chose a different path, and the consequences that came along with that for so many of us. And so for me, my life has to be honorable for that kind of commitment, that kind of sacrifice. Because, and I don't know when they came over. I don't know what led to my family being in Brunswick, North Carolina, but I do know the South was brutal to enslaved Africans. I do know it was hard work, hard labor, a intentional way and path to minimize our intellect, to abuse our bodies. And I would not be here in this position had it not been for those sacrifices, those commitments. And so everything I do and all of what I stand for is really an honor to those people who made it possible for me to be here. I'm glad they didn't jump.
What do you think about those who did jump, Darrin?
I think people make decisions for various reasons. I think you see that play out today in our current context. There are people who are in positions like mine who would rather quit or resign than to stay in and fight or resist or from the inside out. And I think an individual has to reconcile that with themselves. I'm not quite sure for the people who jump what that their legacy would be today. You know, I do know for the people who stayed, people like you and I, Michelle, if you're descendants are from slavery, then we honor them, and so I can't speak for them. I just know that the promise, the potential of seed was probably lost somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, and to me, I think that's a little bit of a travesty.
You know, Darrin, it's interesting. You are the first guest and probably one of the first people that I have met who descends from enslaved people who has referred to our ancestors and specifically acknowledged our ancestors who didn't jump. And part of why that's relevant for me is because I have often told, if anyone who meets me and hears about some of the enslaved narrative work that I do, or any of the work that I do, really tends to hear the fact that I went to UCLA and I graduated in 2004, and I went to African grad. So of course that's the graduation for students of African descent. And the guest speaker, who I often say is Herb Wesson, I'm not quite sure that it was, but I'm fairly also certain that it was Herb Wesson. So we'll just say for this purposes that it was Herb Wesson who said, look, many of you students are graduating today because somebody survived. Not everybody who was being transported, shipped from Africa to this continent survived it. Some people simply jumped ship. Some people would have rather to commit suicide than to be enslaved in this country. So how are you going to live your life knowing that you are here purely because of someone's survival? So this is in 2004. So of course, this is 21 years ago. And I will say it is a question that I have been asking for most of my life. How can I honor the individuals who survived and who woke up enslaved, who went to bed enslaved? It's why I went to Harvard. It's why I went to Princeton. It was why I've lived my life the way that I have. It's why we have this company to honor our ancestors, to do storytelling that feels like sacred work. It's, again, always to answer this question: am I living a life that is worthy of our ancestors' survival? And I'm wondering, well, I'll just say for myself, I don't blame, I don't shame those who did jump, who said, you know what, I'm not trying to do this. I'm not trying to be enslaved in this country that I do not know. And so for them to see suicide as a means of, for them, freedom, as a means of self-determination, I value that decision, recognizing that I have never, I will hopefully never have an understanding of having to make that decision. But at the same time, I also honor those who had the courage, or I don't even know what it is, the capacity to continue on this boat to a land that they don't know, to wake up enslaved, to go to bed enslaved so many times, rinse and repeat, so that you and I could be here.
Yeah. I think to that point, you know, the word, and we always talk about it from a survival standpoint, they had to survive, right? Some people, even today, can't fathom a life in bondage, or you could describe the bondage a lot of different ways. I think there are people who survived, and then there are people who didn't make it because of disease, because of all of those things. So they didn't survive. And so there's a whole group of people that I spend time, Michelle, wondering about. I spend time wondering about the folks who did jump, and the level of, to me, and I think it is courageous, a courageous resistance statement that says, I would rather be in a watery grave than in bondage to this system and all those things. And I think those people act as a witness too, to what who we are as a people in a different way, that's not to be marginalized or judged, but to be recognized and appreciated. Um, for me, in my sensibilities about who I am today and why I live the life I live and do the things I do, if I think back to that time, it's because I know someone who probably looks a lot like me didn't didn't jump, didn't leave the boat, had the physical stamina, to overcome disease and sickness and all of those things, to allow Isaac to do the things that he's done, to bear John, and to have Darrin, and I'm so grateful for that.
So, what did it mean to be called into the ministry? I think you said you were called into the ministry at 23, which is pretty young. What does it mean for you to be called into the ministry? Or what did that calling look like for you?
I'll never forget the day. So I didn't grow up in church. As a matter of fact, you might qualify my family as a CME, Christmas, Mother's Day, and Easter. Those were the only days that we went to church on a calendar year basis. And but I always felt this connection to a higher being. There were times where growing up I'd feel lonely, I'd feel sad, wondered about who my biological father was, and I just feel this sense of comfort come upon me. And I would hear preachers talk about God. I would hear preachers talk about the Holy Spirit, and it was too abstract for me. And um, and so when I went to college, you're a college kid, football player. One of my teammates, his dad was the pastor of a church that wasn't too far from the campus, Craig Richard and Pastor James Richard. And Pastor Richard was my first pastor. He was the first, um, 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 Mount Calvary Missionary Baptist Church. And Pastor Richard and his wife Phoebe were the archetypical beautiful family with beautiful children that in your mind's eye just lived the right way and did the right things. And he took special interest in the guys who were Craig's friends, not from a standpoint that he was trying to, um, dictate what we did or beat us over the head with the Bible, because he was pretty cool. But he was really interested in developing young black men. All of us were black, and we were mostly from the Low Country. And so I really connected with Pastor Richard, and we would spend time talking. And I come to realize later that he was helping me uncover my spiritual journey. As we call it in school, your spiritual formations. And so I was starting to develop that. And so I would teach, Bible study. You don't have to have a degree or ministerial degree to do that. So Sunday school and lead little group. And in 1994, you might remember this. I was a young second lieutenant. It was Christmas '94, V's my wife, we were sitting in. I had been deployed overseas, had seen some things, laying in the bed, and I had this experience where I saw what I would describe today as the image of Christ, bloody, beaten, and this piercing eyeball. And I don't know, I probably was sleeping. It's probably a very vivid dream. And I saw this piercing eyeball looking at me. And the reason I was distraught that night is because there was a woman in Union, South Carolina, who drowned her three sons, blamed it on a black guy in a lake that I had been to when I was in college. This was a white woman, three mixed race children, drowned those boys, blamed it on a black man, and then earlier that November, October, they found out that she was telling a lie. She had murdered her sons. And I started out loud questioning, how is all this going on? What's going on? What's happening? And there were some other stories of things going on. You recall in the early '90s, Nelson Mandela was freed, and we were doing this. Rodney King had happened my freshman year, and so there were all these things, and I was pretty much active in all of that during my college years. And that night, I saw this image, and that eye looking at me, and asked me one question: "What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it?" And I thought to myself, what can I do about it? And weeks later, I used to read the King James Version of the Bible, and it felt like reading Greek. And weeks later, I picked up my Bible that I had gotten from Wofford as a graduation gift, and the scriptures became clear to me. The stories, the parables, the proverbs, they all, I can't explain it, but they made sense. And then I had this incredible urge to share that with people. And I called Pastor Richard. My wife and I were stationed at Fort Stewart, Georgia at the time. I called Pastor Richard because we were driving back and forth to church from Hinesville, Georgia to Union. It's really Cowpen, South Carolina. And I said, I can't wait to talk to you this weekend because something happened. And so he helped me understand that. And so at the ripe old age of 23, I accepted what people would call a calling to the ministry. And then I spent the next 4 or 5 years training and being developed in the ministry. And I think and I was on active duty in the military at the time, so that was a good juxtaposition of you know a vocation that potentially kills people with a avocation and ministry calling that's designed to redeem people. And so that really has been um, quite powerful in my life to think about how, on the one hand, you're trying to stop evil from happening, which what Americans used to say we did in the world, and restore communities and countries and spread democracy. And I believe that. And with this mindset of how do we redeem people? How do we bring people to a point where they maximize who they are in my faith tradition in Christ and be what God created them to be? And so it's been a journey for me to do that over the last 22 years. 32 years. I keep saying 22. I am not 45. I wish I was.
Darrin, I'm not quite sure if we ever talked about this, but I come from a military family. So my father is Navy, served 20 years in the Navy, of course. And then I have uncles and I have cousins who are also in the military. I was born on Camp Pendleton. And so I have always been grateful to the military in the way that it created a way for my sisters and I through college, the life it provided for my family, again, through my father's service, and for, of course, my mother who benefited from that as well. And it's probably not surprising that my father wanted his daughters to follow in his footsteps. So it would have been awesome if my sisters and I would have pursued being in the military. For reasons it's not even really, it doesn't really matter. The point is that it wasn't a good fit for us. And so of course we chose different paths. But then when I was leaving Harvard Divinity School, and I was pretty lost and didn't really have a plan, or the plan that I did have was no longer something that I wanted to pursue. By the time I got to Vassar College, working in the religion and spiritual life department, I was still trying to think through, well, what are my next steps after this? And I thought about being in the chaplaincy. And being in the chaplaincy, again, when you're lost and you have an MDiv, like, well, then let's just try that one. But the challenge for me, of course, when I was thinking about pursuing the chaplaincy in the military, was that I didn't have a denominational affiliation. And of course, at least at the time when I was thinking about chaplaincy, the military required that you are, number one, ordained, and then of course you're ordained by a denomination that people have heard of, because of course nobody wants someone to say, hey, I'm called to be a minister, where do I sign up to then lead these men and women in the military? So I get that. And so of course it didn't really work out for me to pursue that. But I also was thinking, when I was looking at the application, there's this interesting challenge for the chaplain, the person of faith, and again, of course, of many faiths, whether it could be Christian faith, of course, it could be of Muslim faith, Jewish faith, and on and on. But I found it challenging to juxtapose, let's say, what the DoD would call the warfighter's mission, to your point, killing people, protecting this country, and that sometimes requires that you kill people, and then the chaplain's objective to and belief and faith tradition that tends to believe in the redemption of people. So on the one hand, you're killing people, and on the other hand, you're honoring their sacred humanity and their dignity as a human being and their right to life. So I found those two things to be challenging to put together. And also this question of allegiance, as a person of faith, again, as someone who's committed, as one who might have been committed to being a chaplain, ultimately one's allegiance can tend to be to a God, a higher power, ultimate reality, whatever word one wants to use. But of course, if you're a chaplain in the military, then one's allegiance is also to the United States of America. And just trying to think, what does it mean to be a person of faith, and also to be someone who has an allegiance to a nation state? All of that just seemed like that's hard. It's a little too hard for me to figure out, and it's not my calling. More importantly, it's not my calling. So I never pursued it. Being a minister, I never pursued being a chaplain, for predominantly because it's not my calling. And of course, as I often tell people, the work of doing storytelling, of telling your story and others, is sacred work. That is my calling, doing this work of Samuel and Marie. All that to say is, what is it that led you to, as someone who's in the ministry, what is it that led you to being actually in the military, and how did you negotiate these two worlds of military life, military perspective, warfighter, juxtaposed to minister, redeemer, believing in a redeemer, and believing in the sacredness of one's humanity and protection of life?
Yeah. Well, I actually, before I got my football scholarship,
Where did you go to school, Darrin?
Wofford College in Spartanburg, South Carolina. Before I went into Wofford, I thought I was going to enlist in the Army, because all of my uncles either served in the Army or Navy. Service was something that we all believed in, military service, and we knew in that generation that was almost always a way out to higher economic opportunity through the training you could receive, through the education benefits, through the housing benefits. So I was thinking about it from that direction. And when I got my football scholarship and knew I was going to college, I stayed in ROTC. No one had ever been an officer. And so I said, well, I want to serve. And so, Michelle, I thought that I was going to do my 3-year tour as a lieutenant, finish up that, go to graduate school, get my master's in social work or psychology, and go on the doctoral route and either be a psychologist or something like that. And I told you about my experience in 1994 on active duty, and I realized that for me, military service and the leadership that you experience there, the perspectives that you get on people, the perspectives you get on humanity, the ability to see people do great things for other people in different countries, balanced by the fact that in 1997 we were bystanders in the genocides in Rwanda, and we could have done something about that as a country. And so the deep capacity for people to do evil, and so for me, uh, my military experience really was an extension of ministry for me because I hung out with the chaplains all the time. I helped lead studies, Bible studies. V was involved in the church choir when we weren't deployed. Our son Darrin was very engaged, and so for me, that balance became very natural. I was an officer, so soldiers reported to me, and I say my first congregation was my 56 soldier platoon as a young second lieutenant, and my care for them, my willingness and ability to empathize and communicate with them, knowing that if we were ever in harm's way, that I was going to have to be in a position to maybe make life and death situations that involved their lives. And so I wanted to get to know these soldiers, men and women, on a personal level, because those decisions are hard and weighty. And quite honestly, I think sometimes leaders are too far away from the people they serve as leaders, and so they don't appreciate some of the challenges and the opportunities they have to motivate, to inspire, to do those things. To me, that was all ministry. I'm a builder by nature in terms of building people, building systems, administratively. My ministerial gift mix is administration, leadership, and exhortation. And so for those skills to be developed, I think the military was the best sort of proving ground, if you will. Um, I'll just relate this story to you. I was in 1999, there was a truck accident in Macedonia. We were supporting operations in the Balkans around the genocides and some of the things that was going on in that area at the time. And I had two soldiers that were running operations from Greece down to Macedonia, um, and this big military truck jackknifed and severed the heads of two soldiers. And we had to deal with that. I mean, it was a really long, narrow strip of highway. So I was the operations officer on the scene. I was a captain, and I had all of these young soldiers with this torn up piece of metal that sort of resembled a truck. And that's when the ministry aspect kicked in. There was an operational aspect to it. We had to get things done. We had to secure the area. We had to do all of those things. But as soon as we got that stuff taken care of, the empathy, the caring, the compassion, I had soldiers crying on my shoulders. I cried with them. I had soldiers that were upset and angry, that I had to sort of walk off the ledge, so to speak, and help them understand that sometimes bad things happen even to good people. And so for me, what I felt in 1999 and 2000 and 2001 is exactly how I feel today about my approach to this work, is that we work in communities, we work with communities, we work with donors, we work with the public sector, elected officials, and finding them where they are, and having an open heart to hear, even when what they're saying is like a teacher scratching on that old blackboard. If people remember what that is, it's so repulsive to you that you literally want to scream. Um, the work that we do in philanthropy is so important, to stay in that conversation and try to help find a place of commonality, a place of satiety, so then we can figure out ways in which we can move forward. And if we can't move forward, then that's okay. at least we understand the ground in which we're working, the theater of operations in which they're maneuvering, and we can then govern ourselves appropriately. Ministry and military have been such a vital part, that those experiences, those 10 years almost doing that together, and then the pastoring of two churches and two completely different dynamics. We pastored a church, V and I, in Germany, Mannheim, Germany, and we translated our services in two languages, German and Spanish, because we had a multicultural congregation. It was powerful. We had soldiers, we had gypsies, we had Jews, and we had Germans. It was powerful, and so it gives you an appreciation in a military complex like that people are going to be different, but in actuality we're a lot the same. We just have to figure out that sameness, cultivate that, and then find a way to move forward together.
So one of the things I'm thinking about is the story of the soldiers and you on the side of the road consoling those soldiers. And it sort of confirmed, my fondness for you as a colleague in the space of philanthropy because of your experience in the military. And what I'll say is that, so just for the sake of context, we are just coming out of the first quarter of 2025. I'm headed into the second quarter of 2025, and it can feel very much like a chaotic time for people. You can open the newspaper and then close the newspaper if you read a newspaper. You can open your laptop and look at what's happening on the news, or turn on the radio or listen to a podcast, and it can feel catastrophic. It can feel hopeless. A lot of people can feel really hopeless. And maybe the question that I have for you is, I just wonder, given your experience in the military, I wonder if you have felt like this work is easier, the work of being a president and CEO of a foundation, if you have felt like, well, this work is easy because I used to be in a position that was making life and death decisions on behalf of communities. But then at the same time, as I asked that question, it's also worth saying, of course, in philanthropy, people are often still making life and death decisions on behalf of communities, right? Where funding happens, whom one is funding, regarding healthcare, regarding resources, food, access to resources, all of that. So I don't say that I'm not suggesting that those who are working in philanthropy are not also making life and death decisions, but you were in a space in the military where you just watched men be killed and now you've got to respond to that. So the question that I'm asking is ultimately, do you think that because you have a military background where you were making life and death decisions, where you were seeing people killed and having to respond to that then makes your work easier as a president of a foundation who may not have to make decisions regarding life and death in the way that you were in the military? Is this easy? Is being the foundation president of coastal community foundations easy for you? Is the question.
What I would say to that is, I don't. It's none of this is easy, and so I don't want to make light of the current context. I think for me, though, my experiences allow me to have a certain perspective. And to your point, when you've seen people die, through accidents or malfunctioning equipment, when you've been the target in Egypt, for example, in 1995, our base was the target of a potential terrorist attack. And when you see that and you're that close to these kinds of life and death situations, when you're sitting here on the old Navy Yard in Charleston, South Carolina, in your office, it just gives you a perspective that while these times are challenging and bad, and for those of us who have agency and control, it's not as bad as it could be. Despite what people believe or feel, and not to minimize anyone's feelings, the fact that we can actually have venues like this or ABFI or other places to go and gather and have these discussions and conversations should give us a sense of relief, quite frankly, because I've been in countries where this doesn't happen. I've been in countries where it would be forbidden to you for you to talk to me without a head covering, right? That's 2025 stuff. And so we do have a lot of freedom. We do have a lot of power if we understand what I learned, and that is as a leader, and I don't think leadership is all about the title or the position. I think it's about the level of influence. If you are able to influence one other person, then that's leadership. John Maxwell would say leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. Some of us influence systems, finances, resources, we influence at different levels. But if you have agency, if you have the ability to influence any of those things, then you have power. And so we have to sometimes step back and evaluate, what power do I have? What influence can I exert? And there are different roles for different people. You in the positions that we find ourselves, my influence, like it is with my board, because we have reputational capital. Might influence policymakers, business leaders, and sometimes that's not out front. People will say lack of transparency or not transparent, but sometimes the tactical mission to reach strategic goals and then operational outcomes has to be done in a way where people can't be privy to the I call it the sausage making being done. That's the benefit and the burden of this kind of leadership, is that you are at those tables, you are invited in those conversations. My deal is use the privilege, use the power, use the voice you have when you're at those tables. I learned that as a young lieutenant. Um, some of your listeners might remember Lieutenant General Russell Honore. We called him the Raging Cajun. But General Honore, I worked for him when I was a young lieutenant. And one of the fondest things I remember is being on deployment with General Honore, Colonel Honore at the time, and listening to him talk about perspectives, the operational, the strategic, and the tactical, and how he tied those things together. And one night we were sitting there, and he said, "You, Lieutenant." Now General Honore is like 6 feet and some change. I'm 5'6". I've been that way since I was 13. And he said, "See that young short logistics?" He called us logistics weenies. "He's got a role to play. His platoon has a role to play. And we need him to do his dead level best job right where he is, so that my M1s, my M2 Bradleys, so that the other folks can do their job." My job was to make sure they had fuel and they had weaponry and they had water. That's what my platoon did. And it settles on me now, as we look at this context we're in, that every one of us have a role to play, and every other one of us are counting on us playing those roles precisely, with excellence, because it's an ecosystem. There are no supermans, there are no superwomen, and if we can play our roles the way we are called to do so, then I think we can advance. There's collaboration that can take place, that we need to walk alongside each other, as well as those who might not look like us, who are just as frustrated, just as upset, just as tearful. We need to be able to lean into that. And so those are just some of the lessons I've learned about this perspective. Because sometimes you can absolutely feel like you're under a mushroom, and you're in the echo chamber of despair. Well, I want to lift us beyond the echo chamber of despair to this idea that we actually live within a community of hope. There are other people out there who need to connect with us and work together to push some things forward. And so let's get out of that echo chamber of fear, and let's move toward that community hope. We are out here.
Do you have any fear right now these days?
Um, it might feel it's odd to say, but we've been working on this as an organization since August 2023, when the Supreme Court case happened. And so, because I don't want to sound like I'm not fair, there's certain things that do cause me fear. I think about my son, Darrin Jr. I think about his children and my grandchildren. I think about my nieces and nephews, and I'm fearful for the kind of world they're going to inherit. I think my generation in where I am in the spectrum, uh, in many cases, we're going to be all right. I wonder and worry about them. I'm fearful that when I talk to my 16-year-old grandniece, that her level of despair and apathy and fear will paralyze her in a way that she can't move forward. It's a different, to me, consideration for young 16 to 22, 24-year-olds now. I'm fearful for that generation, um, and what they will inherit, and how they will grow over the next 20 years in terms of their level of influence, the apathy with the political system, the apathy and the distrust of institutions, for that generation. And some of us cause me great fear, because then what happens is autocratic leaders come into play like we have right now, because people, despite what others think, always look for leadership. They will chase and try to find the strong leader who can point them in a direction, good or bad, inspire them to action in ways that can be negative. You're the victim, versus ways that are positive. You deserve this. You're no different than anyone else. People follow leadership. They respond to it. And my fear is, my real fear is, are we in a position to develop generations of leaders who look like us, who are not in despair, who are not apathetic, who can overcome some of the challenges that we're facing today? And that's on me, that's on all of us, to help encourage that generation and ourselves. So that's my biggest fear. From the standpoint of the work that we do, I am not fearful at all. I think we have to get philanthropic organizations refocused on their mission. And when people push back about this DEI stuff, well, what is a foundation? And why would a foundation ever been founded? Unless it's founded for real negative purposes, but to do good, but to um, what our Jewish friends would say, to repair the world, tikkun olam. What we believe philanthropy is all about: generosity and human dignity and healing, and love for humanity. But for that, we probably shouldn't be doing this work. And so, to carry my military background forward, as a young officer, I always knew that whether we could have been going to Kuwait, or we could have been going to Thessaloniki, Greece, the mission was the same. We had a clear mission set, and we're gonna fulfill that mission. The context, the battlefield, the area of operation were different. And so we had to adjust our tactics to the evolving difference that we were seeing as we were executing our mission. Our mission to do good as philanthropy has not changed. The conditions for why we are here doing the work that we are doing has not changed. We can rest assured that it's going to probably be worse. And so we have to adapt our tactics. We have to adapt our approach strategies. We have to adapt who we consider partner and how we partner. Philanthropic organizations have to be more flexible. We can't walk into a community or into a situation and think we know it all. And so I think that adaptation requires a leadership agility that I just appreciate the benefit of having to land in places, literally out of an airplane on a parachute, and adjust to the conditions on the ground, because that could have been different than the 6 months worth of planning we did for that event, for that moment. And you had to adjust on the fly. Well, we have the luxury in philanthropy that not everything has to be a five-alarm fire. We actually can plan, we can prepare, and then we can take actions, responsible actions, to continue to advance our mission. And so that's my hope as I think about where we are. But no, we don't operate in fear.
So, Darrin, you've talked a little bit about the fear that's there. And can you talk a little bit about any hope that you might have, and if that hope is in philanthropy, what that hope actually looks like for you?
This idea that you teach a person to fish rather than give them a fish. And so many times philanthropy in the world is looking for a technical solution to a complex problem. So is there, even for this generation and for us, are there solutions today that we can implement that provides us opportunity to either hold ground, we don't want to lose anything, or advance our ground in other areas? So there's the political lever, there's the social lever, there's all of these things. And how much of that are we actually giving to and preparing our next generation for? When I say next generation, I even mean people inside our organizations, the young philanthropic professionals, and bringing them aside and talking to them, coaching them, spending time with them. I do that all the time with my staff. I do staff one-on-ones with every staff member. People tell me, Darrin, that's too much time, too much whatever. And I say, as a leader, I can't think of a better use of my time than to helping them understand the strategic and the operational, and how their efforts every day contribute to that big thing. And then where they are open and sharing, that question I love is, Darrin, how can I get better? How can I be? And then that's where the coaching, the mentorship, the development comes in. This is the opportunity to speak into the lives of younger professionals, in particular, minority or people of color in our field, to say, we need you to stay around. We need you to stick it out. We need you to be here with us. Because we want to pass this on to you, and then showing them a path on how to get there. I'm very open with my younger people, younger professionals, to say, you might need an opportunity in a private foundation. You might need an opportunity somewhere else. And when you're ready, don't be coy. Come and say you're ready, and let me help you get to where you need to go. Because while I want you here, I need you in the field, because this kind of leadership is important. Do I think philanthropy has a key role in alleviating my fear? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's that. But then I think it's also philanthropy understanding and playing its role in local communities. I think, frankly, we have to step up. I mean, we're too quiet, we're too passive. Some of us want to be Switzerland. And I think that day is past where you can be neutral. Any grant you make is a position that you're stating, because people will interpret that as a expression of something. And so I think we have to get used to that and just be real. Otherwise, you're not going to give any grants. You're going to be scrutinized for who you give to, how you give to them. And so you just got to be ready. And again, if your mission is to do a certain thing, go out there and do that thing, because it's not illegal to do that thing. If your mission is to, and you have a part of carrying out that mission is advocacy, go be an advocate. If that's community building and engaging and convening, go do that. But don't give up ground, and don't give up ground when you don't have to. That's not good.
Yesterday at the AbbVie conference, one of the speakers talked about how frustrated she gets because she has funders who are coming to her hand wringing and feeling lost, saying, we're just not quite sure how to be helpful. Oh, teacher, give me guidance. How do I be helpful? And her response is, well, you write a check is what you do, because that's what you do. You're a funder, and funders write checks. So maybe you should write a check to a cause, of course, that will create change. And again, she was baffled because there is this sense of not knowing what to do. You've already addressed that oftentimes in the sector of philanthropy, the community is not as passive. It's not as active as it ought to be, that it actually is passive. And for people who are not a part of the sector of philanthropy, there can be some confusion on their end as well, thinking like, well, this sector is well funded. It's got endowments. It's got many people talk about the trillions of dollars that is sitting within the sector of philanthropy. And that would give many a thought that that's a powerful place. Why do these people with power feel so powerless? So, as an insider, as a president of a foundation, Darrin, can you give us a sense of where you think some of that hand wringing and that passivity comes from within a sector that is sitting on so many funds that actually can create change and can be quite powerful?
Well, it's because I think foundations have limited their idea of the power they have to the size check they can write. And none of these issues
Got
or
it.
problems, again, I said this earlier, are technical problems.
Hmm.
They are adaptive problems. There are problems that if you're going to write a check, you better have some idea of the policies that undergird and perpetuate the problem you're trying to solve with a check. And if there's a bad policy, it doesn't really matter how much money you give to it. You can have a temporary fix, but because the policy is bad, because the conditions haven't changed, soon as that money goes away, none of us like to give programs money forever, then that condition persists. And so I think a part of what philanthropy has to open its aperture up to is that when I say we need to be more vocal, is we have what Ambassador Jim Joseph calls social capital. It's the networks, it's the people. If we want to
Hmm.
affect policy, if we want to affect systems change, the more emergent and adaptive problems, then we're going to have to do that with a combination of policy and money. And so, who do you know in Congress? Who do you know at the state General Assembly? Who do you know in the mayor's office? And how do you influence the flow of public resources? How do you influence the legislation or the policy or the whatever it is, and do that in a way again that's mission oriented? We need to be more vocal, so we need to use what the ambassador calls our moral capital. Sometimes it requires philanthropic organizations because we do sit on these endowments. Because we do, in many cases, if you're private, you have a small board of people you know that know you, um, and that are not going to lose the endowment, where you can actually stand up and say, this is not right. And here are the reasons why. Intellectual capital, do the research, share the data, make the case, write the white paper, the friend of the court beef, whatever it is, to give to elected officials and others to say, you need to read this because this is the consequences you may not be familiar with because you're thinking about it from a political standpoint. And then the last thing I would say, if you're a foundation leader and you are, regardless of the size of the community, you have reputational capital. You walk into a room in a small community or even a large city, and you're on top of a big foundation, people know who you are. What are you willing to leverage in that reputational capital that you have on your own because you've been very successful, and that of your organization to move the conversation, to challenge the narrative, to bring others along, to say, you know what, we got to work together, or we need to co-invest, or let's go to DC and let's work on this policy related issue together because we know it's good for our communities. That's what I'm talking about. It's not just about writing a check. It's about showing up in those other four ways. It's not just about the money because sometimes money can't solve these problems, not alone.
I hear you, Darrin. And what I would say to AbbVie's credit is that much of what the conference was about is getting beyond writing checks. Of course, you don't know how to be helpful. Writing a check is a great start, but it has to go beyond that. That we have to think about policies that are in place that continue the need for checks to be written. So, Darrin, I had mentioned at the beginning of this that I come from a military family. My dad, Solomon L. Jackson III, served in the military, served in the Navy for 20 years. He was stationed out of San Diego for those 20 years. And he retired. His 28th year would have been in 1996. And I think it's hard for me to do the math at the moment, but I think he was 38, probably 38, 39 when he retired. So pretty young, yeah, certainly younger than me right now. And knowing only one way of life for 20 years. And then at 38, 39 years old, being transferred into civilian life, so out of military life into civilian life, can be pretty challenging. And my dad has been open about some of the challenges that he had when transitioning from a predominant military lifestyle and perspective and way of being in the world to then being in the civilian space where no one gave him any guidance. And I know that a lot of people are aware of some of the suicide rates that exist for veterans once they leave the military, and just the sense of feeling lost and not knowing where to go, what to do. And so the questions that I have for you is, do you think that there is space for veterans within the sector of philanthropy? And then two, if you think there is space, what is it that you think veterans bring uniquely to the sector of philanthropy that may not be as prevalent in maybe other professionals who are in the sector?
Yeah, so, and I may be a little biased on this because I am a former soldier. I absolutely think there is room and space for former military people, not only in philanthropy, but everywhere they choose to work, live, and serve. And I'll tell you why. Most, if not all, of the service branches do this wonderful thing, whether it's with officers or with enlisted, called basic training. And in basic training, you learn a couple of key, I call them life skills. You learn first and foremost how to be personally accountable. You learn how to make decisions, and you learn how to make decisions under duress, under pressure, and that's a gift in any organization. You learn how to appreciate and understand people who are different from you. The diversity in most of the branches of the military is so powerful that you could be sitting in a platoon bay with a person from upstate New York, a person from um, um, Arizona, and somebody from the Gullah Geechee town of Estill, South Carolina, and have commonality uh, as human beings. And so the ability to communicate is key in the military as another attribute. You as a young 18-year-old, you're given responsibility for hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment. So there's a built-in level of accountability. If a person is served well, then those skills, we call them soft skills, or I think there's another word for them now, those attributes are transferable to just about any career. Where I think they are particularly important in philanthropy, particularly in philanthropic organizations that respect and honor communities, is that those people, like I just described, will be great program officers. They're going to be great. They're going to be great if you're a community foundation, your relationship management people, they're going to be great relationship management people. If you are working on things like we do here, like impact investing, they're gonna learn the language of the investment banker or the venture capitalist, and then they're gonna learn the language of the small business or whoever who's trying to get that capital, and they're going to be a translator in that. Why? Because they've grown up doing that in their military service. I think they're also going to be mission focused. They're going to know and understand that sometimes, as a philanthropic organization, the best thing you can do is be quiet, and they're going to respect and understand that, right? They're also going to know that sometimes you have to step out and be upfront, and they will not shy away from that either. And so, developing those philanthropic leaders with that base of knowledge and experience, and quite frankly, like I shared about myself, perspective, I think can only bolster our field and what ex-military personnel bring to it.
So, Darrin, we talked about ministry, we talked about the military. How does that all then get you into the sector of philanthropy and then running a foundation?
It's an interesting story because when I was at Wofford, so I'd left the military right at 10 years. I went to the corporate world, hated it. And then you do what you do, right? I'm 31 years old. I need a job. I got this young wife and son. And so you go back to your alma mater if you didn't fall out of favor with them or they didn't fall out of favor with you. I always gave back to the Terrier Club and you get a job. And so for those 4 years I was at Wofford, I joined several nonprofit boards. I was working in the community. I was pastoring a church at the same time. And I had time to really evaluate what I wanted to do with my life. This calling I knew wasn't going to be full-time ministry because I felt like the church as an institution, we could talk about that at a later time, was not what I believe. Well, let me just change that subject. I knew that my ministry was beyond the four walls of a church or um, denominational church stuff is my technical term for it. And so I said, well, maybe the nonprofit sector is that where I can earn a living and fulfill my calling. And so I went and I applied for this job to run a direct service nonprofit up in Greenville, South Carolina. Got offered the position with one caveat that I had to leave Spartanburg, like literally a 20-mile distance between Greenville and Spartanburg, and move into the community of this where this nonprofit was, a direct service nonprofit, food pantry, so forth and so on. And I said, hey, don't worry, I will be there. It will be like I live in this community. Well, I'm a 5 o'clock, 5:30 every day, get up. I'm in this office by 7:15 to 7:30 every morning. I'm typically out by 4 o'clock, 4:30. I have no problems. Now, when I'm off, I'm off. My folks know that. But I don't have any problem getting up and being places. Well, that was the one thing they required, and it's the one thing I was just unwilling to do because my son had been traveling around with my wife and I around the world, literally, for the first 14 years of his life. He was getting ready to go to high school, and it's like we weren't disrupt. Matter of fact, he was a freshman in high school. We weren't going to disrupt his high school years to move 20 miles away. So turn that job down. About a month later, I get a call from the CEO and president of United Way of Greenville County, Ted Hendry, still a mentor of mine today. Called me up, said he was talking to people in the community, thought I might want to have a conversation. We had a 2.5 hour dinner. Next thing I know, I'm the vice president of community impact for United Way, a grant making position. And I think what drew me to that was the opportunity to work at a more macro level, to be able to influence things like policy, to be able to influence and use our reputational capital to lead with this value of doing things with the communities, not to the communities, building the relationships, and then where necessary and available, leveraging our United Way grant dollars with public dollars or with other private dollars. And so that was just a great way for me to do that. And since that experience back, when I joined the United Way back in 2007, since that experience, my fondness for philanthropy and what philanthropy is capable of has only grown if we actually utilize those things that Ambassador Joseph talked about in his passing gear work.
What is your proudest moment in your career at this point, Darrin? I mean, you've done ministry, military, philanthropy. What are you most proud of?
I think the thing that I'm most proud of, and I think I shared this with you earlier, Michelle, I love to build and develop people. And sort of like they say NFL coaches have a coaching tree. If you had an assistant that became a head coach, what's your coaching tree? And so as a CEO, since the time I've been a CEO or a vice president in the nonprofit sector, I have about 8 CEOs that have literally I've coached, I've mentored, brought into an organization, developed them, and saw to it that they got the opportunity to lead their own organizations. And so I think from a professional standpoint, that's the thing I'm most proud of, is developing other leaders, working with people who I don't may not even know, but 10 minutes and hear that they have a challenge, something I may have experienced or know someone else is experiencing, connecting those people and solving those problems. I love that aspect of what I do, and the people development of it is probably the most precious thing to me, as it relates to this. Our foundation has more than doubled since I've been here. That's that's cool. Our We've got a social impact fund. That's wonderful. We've helped a lot of communities and done a lot of great work. But I think the enduring thing are the people who carry the work forward. And to me, that's been the investment that I'm most proud of.
What is the hardest thing you do in this work of philanthropy?
Tempering, that's the easy one. Tempering my own personal feelings and beliefs. I didn't say suspending, but tempering them for the right moment and opportunity to express them. And it's been hard. And here's what I mean. As a CEO of an organization, as a leader, sometimes people wait to see what you're going to say or to hear what they take their cues from you. And I have this thing that I say, one of my Gossisms is I'm going to hold my comments because I don't want to taint the jury pool. You know, I don't want you to know what I'm thinking because I want to hear honestly what you're thinking and candidly with what you're thinking. That's board and staff. And so the hardest thing for me about this work is sometimes feeling so impassioned and so upset or so angry that I can't express that beforehand. Like, I want you to know how I feel. And I want you, I want to share that. V gets a lot of it, but leaving space for the teams that have to carry out and execute the mission is so hard sometimes because in many cases you have to temper how you feel and give people space to express how they feel if they use that space. And so that's probably particularly over the last 4 months been the hardest thing for me, because I don't think you get to these positions without having an opinion and being willing and able to express that opinion. But I think sometimes our quiet as leaders and our calm provides space for people to express, to be expressive, and then they welcome what you have to say. In a lot of cases, there are perspectives that I hadn't considered, and right there on the spot, I'm considering. It's helping me evolve my perspective, and that's been very helpful. I learned that as a young second lieutenant from my first sergeant J.W. cousin, who just said, "Sir, you can't always be the first one talking. You should be the last one talking."
One of the things that we do during our
Right?
staff meetings, Darrin, for Simula Murray, is we often will ask the group, what was the mistake that you made this week? And then what did you learn from it? Because I think it's important to acknowledge, honor, celebrate our mistakes at times. And I think it's fascinating to hear. And of course, I share as well. And then I think I find it challenging sometimes to in Black spaces to share
Right.
those mistakes or to celebrate mistakes, celebrate failures, because I think we often talk about our Black excellence, our Black girl magic, our Black man magic, and how awesome and brilliant we are, which is true. We are brilliant. We are excellent.
Right.
We are, in many ways, have magic inside of us. But at the same
That's right.
time, I think those approaches can be a cover for perfectionism, and perfectionism can be a killer. It doesn't allow people to be human, and when people become human, acknowledge their mistakes, that can sometimes be so overwhelming or so detrimental to someone that they end up not being able to move forward because of a failure. And is there a particular failure that you've had in your career that has been especially meaningful for you or especially informative for you?
Yeah. I mean, I've made a few, and I'll give you just a couple of anecdotes. stories. When I was a young lieutenant, we were deployed in Kuwait, and I was the logistics officer for the battalion. And my battalion commander said, "Hey, we want to celebrate. I can't remember which holiday it was, but let's do something nice for the soldiers." And in Kuwait, I mean, I literally had a armed person with bags of Kuwaiti dinar, and so I could just go out on the economy and purchase things. Well, I was going to please the commander, doing what I'm told, and I went out and bought like $780 in American dollars worth of cakes. Get back to the States in December, get my paycheck, and the paycheck was like $300 something. Now, as a young lieutenant, you don't get a lot of money, right? To take all of the deductions and everything else, all of the things you do. And it's like $300 something. I'm like, what happened to my pay? And so I look at the notes, and I literally got a statement of charges because I did something that I wasn't supposed to do with government money in Kuwait. And so the procurement office, the auditing offices, so all the stuff about fraud, waste, and abuse. Come on, man. At least in the military, they look at every penny, right? Um, at least they did in the early '90s. So that what that taught me was you can have great respect and trust for the leadership, but you have to know cold how the business runs, the technical aspects of the business. Because not only was that embarrassing, it was embarrassing for the command, it was embarrassing for me as a professional, but then it hurt personally. I had to explain to my wife why we didn't have the money that we thought we were going to have to do the things that we were planning on doing. And so that was very personal. So now it doesn't matter how big our organization is. We read everything. We double check it. We do those things. So it's so important to be in compliance, particularly in a role like this as a Black person, because you don't want anything to come back to quote unquote bite you because we were too lazy to check or we didn't know what we didn't know. And that was not an excuse for the military. And I don't think we can make that an excuse for ourselves. Uh, the other thing, the other thing was a few years ago, I underestimated social media campaigns, and so we made this proposal during the ARPA money ESSER 3, working with the school district superintendent. We thought there was a better way to spend $285 million. And we're going to lead this community, set a community conversation, set up these commissions. And it literally got framed like Darrin Goss and the Community Foundation. We're trying to privatize schools and trying to do all of these things. Who is this person? No educational background, so forth and so on. And we were literally flat footed on the ground playing defense. It was, from a PR standpoint, the worst thing that I ever experienced. My mistake was taking for granted that people understood that as a philanthropic organization, we were here to do good, not to do harm. My miscalculation was the people who wanted to preserve the status quo will go to any lengths to take you down. And so again, an awareness. In those two instances, this idea of perfectionism is hard for Black people in roles. And I would say, and maybe this is my faith tradition, there's only one perfect, just one. And I'm not that person. I'm not a savior. And I'm not even one of the 12 apostles, right? I'm just an imperfect person trying to do excellent work on behalf of my name, my family, my community, and my organization. And so the words I use is this pursuit of excellence. We want to be excellent at what we do because that gives us the opportunity to invite others to join us in doing excellent, good work. We want to be the employer of choice for philanthropic professionals. And so that means that we provide excellent benefits, that we don't cause people or require people to take a salary discount, that we want to be competitive with the market. The market is just not other philanthropic organizations because there aren't many our size and scope in South Carolina, but what other places they could go work, because most of the people who work here can go work at a school district, a government agency, a for-profit communications firm, take your pick. So we try to be competitive with our market. That's what excellence is for me. It is for the organization. And for myself, I got this wonderful best friend and partner of 33 years almost now. And boy, V Goss will keep your feet on the ground. She's just wonderful. She's going to tell me what I need to hear when I need to be built up. She's going to tell me what I need to hear when I need to come down. She's not going to let me get too high with the highs and too low with the lows. That's a Don Staley thing, and that has kept me grounded in the work that I do. So when I feel like I'm inadequate, because I think sometimes we all do, when I feel like I'm unprepared, when I think about my fact that I'm the first generation in my family, my mom's children to go to college and attain a master's degree and lead in this way, sometimes that can be overwhelming, intimidating. Despite all the success I've had, I sometimes I can feel this big. And having a partner, a friend, a confidant to help you see yourself in the context of everything else that's going on really is, to me, essential on both sides of that. Because when you start feeling too big, they also have a moderating effect on you to say, hey, let's stay focused, let's stay in line. You're doing good. You can do a little bit better, and we critique in those ways. So that's how I manage that.
One thing that I think about is this issue of DEI, of course, becoming a four-letter word for many communities, but also the assumptions people make about Black people in spaces right now. And so just for the sake of context, I went to Harvard Divinity School, as I said previously, and I remember having some discussion while I was a student there at Harvard. I remember having a conversation with a non-Harvard student, and we were having a little bit of a debate, and some of my intelligence was questioned, and I likely responded and said, you know what, I went to Harvard, and his response, or I go to Harvard, and his response was, well, you're probably there because you're Black, and you're only there because of some affirmative action slot. And essentially what he was saying was that, at least how I interpreted what he was saying, was that the idea that I was at Harvard was not because I was a master at Greek at the time, or that I was very well versed in New Testament, and that's why I was there to study the New Testament, but that ultimately it was because I needed to fill a Black spot, and I did that. And so the question that I have for you relates to this phenomenon that is happening. Certainly it happened prior to this year, but it's happening certainly more frequently now that DEI is as demonized as it is right now. That when people of color, in this case, we're speaking regarding you and I, when Black people are in positions of leadership, or maybe any position at all these days, but let's just say a position of leadership, that there is an assumption as well that we are only in those positions because of some DEI, affirmative action, some quota needed to be filled, instead of it just possibly being that we were the most qualified, most awesome candidate that anyone could choose on paper, and we also happen to be Black as well. So can you talk a little bit about how you experienced that as a foundation leader, as a Black male foundation leader? And then what advice you might give to people of color, and also, of course, again, as it relates to you and I, Black professionals in the space of the sector of philanthropy, or really any space right now that people are saying we're only there because you're Black. What kind of advice might you give to them to help manage these assumptions that we're not there because we're qualified, we're there because we fill some sort of racial quota?
Well, I can't say that I have not felt that pressure and that anxiety. But let me back up to this process of me being here, and I'm celebrated 9 years in February. When I got the call from the recruiter, who was a African American recruiter, when Isaac called me up and he said that he wanted to talk to me about the Coastal Community Foundation job, it was a month after I first learned about the job. And I looked at my wife and I said to her, they are not going to hire a Black man to run the Coastal Community Foundation in Charleston, South Carolina. Think about the history of Charleston. And my wife said to me, Darrin, if you want the job is yours. So the first time Isaac called me, I didn't give him the time of day. Literally. I didn't want to put myself through that. Maybe that was a bit of fear. I didn't want to potentially put my family through that because they're in Charleston. I didn't want to have to confront this idea that I was going to be a token, right? Like, am I going to be in a pool just to be a token in the pool? And so eventually I ended up saying to Isaac, okay, I'll do a screening interview because of some of the people he had said recommended me for the role that I respected and trusted and that I called. And so long story short, we got to a point where I was the final 3 candidates and I had a conversation. I was living in Baton Rouge, Louisiana at the time. And I left Charleston for one of my 2 in-person interviews. And he asked me, Darrin, do you have any questions? That I had to rush out and all this stuff. I said, I got one question that I really like to ask you before we go forward. He called me that was a Friday. He called me the next day, Saturday morning. And he said, Darrin, what's your question? I said, I think I'm qualified for this job based on what I know. I think I understand where the foundation is trying to go. But this is Charleston, South Carolina. And I don't want to be some token hire. I don't want to be the person who does not get the support, if I am the person that does not get the support from the board, which is what was my primary deal. Is the board behind this, if I'm that person? And he did what any good leader would do. He said, Darrin, if you're that person, then the board will support you. And there's a time frame on it. You got to prove and you got to demonstrate and all this stuff. So that's all I'm asking is a fair shot to be successful, and will the board support it? He said yes. I said great. Rest is history. But I came into my role understanding that we were 9 months removed from the Mother Emanuel massacre of 2015. We're celebrating the 10th anniversary of that in June. I came into my role understanding the context of race and racial history in Charleston, South Carolina. I came into this role realizing my own personal heritage and lineage. And I have never shied away from that. When people say today, I give you this example. I had a case where I was meeting with donors for the first time, a 120-day listening tour. And I had one old Charleston donor look at me, white guy, and said, well, we'll see how long this experiment works out. How long this experiment works out. Well, I said, I guess we'll have to see, right? Takes a lot to deal those kinds of things. And I think that's where sort of spiritual formation comes in for me. Like, that's not my problem. That's his problem. It does hurt, but that's his problem. What I would say to people say, you got this role because you were a DEI hire. If you've been in that role for some period of time and you've been good, just look at the person like I would do today and say, it worked out, didn't it? It worked out, right? 9 years ago, the foundation wasn't where it is. Today, I don't even talk about it. When people talk to me about these things, I said, look at the results, because that's all we really want is an opportunity to prove ourselves, to do the work that we love to do, and results follow. So somebody said, oh, you didn't deserve that role. You only went to this place because of that. Someone said that about, oh, you went to Wofford on a football scholarship. I said, yep, did. What have I done with my Wofford education since then? That person who created that scholarship appreciates the impact that scholarship had on my life. Yeah, I played football. We had winning teams. Cool. They got what they needed. I certainly benefited from it. And I'm not going to be apologetic because it was a scholarship or because of what someone's ideal or idea is about DEI and affirmative action and all those kinds of things. It's what you do with the opportunity, to me, that's more important. That's more important to me. And that's what I tell and coach professionals. Doors will open in a variety of different ways. It's what you do when you walk into that door, how you perform when you have those opportunities, that legitimizes the person or the institution or the way you got into that door, good or bad. Because I've seen some folks. I'm talking about others, and even some folks that look like us who through privilege had doors open for them, and they just boloed. They failed because they weren't prepared. They weren't ready. I didn't understand the consequences of not performing well. And so I'm going on, but I guess my key point is, and I don't mean to sound flip on this, but why does it matter what door you came in? Whether you came in through the gender door, the DEI door, the athletic door, the I'm a friend of the family who knows a person who made a call door. Look, people have been doing this kind of thing for as long as this country's been around. And I just think we have to get over how we got in the room, how we got in a position, and maximize the opportunities we have. Does it hurt? Absolutely. Does it make you think? Well, maybe I will. But then I think we have to remind ourselves, look, I didn't go to Harvard and just skate by. I went to Harvard and I worked just as hard as anybody else. And I got mine just like they got theirs, right? You earned it. You earned it. I always say to leaders when I get ready to promote them or when they get ready to take a leadership position, and it's the same adage with these doors and how you got in and this DEI label. All a title does is provide you an opportunity to prove whether or not you deserve that title or to affirm that you didn't. All that open door provides us is an opportunity to demonstrate that we are absolutely what our ancestors' wildest dreams are, and that we can actually demonstrate excellence, that we can do the work or not. And I just think, for my preference, I think we should spend our time and energy thinking about that rather than the stuff. Now they've weaponized DEI to the point where everything now, this is a concern of mine, where everything now that is quote unquote DEI is sort of like this backlash for opportunity. And that's troubling to me because I hear people saying, well, should I even hire this person? Well, why wouldn't you hire this person? Well, because they're going to be seen as a DEI hire, or it's the only reason you're hiring them because they're a woman or because they're this or that. Well, no, I think they're qualified. Well, hire them. Don't throw logic out the window. And who are you worrying about anyway? If they're performing, you don't have a problem. And if they're not performing, what have you done in your organization to put them in position to win, to be successful? Because you got to do for them what you would do for anyone else.
Earlier this week, I have been at the AbbVie Harambe conference, and Darrin Walker, of course, the president of the Ford Foundation, was honored and was a keynote speaker. And one of the things he talks about is growing up in a very rural area, very low income area, and growing up in a shotgun house on a dirt road. And then that was his entry into this planet. And then now he is running certainly one of the most influential and most well-endowed foundations in the country. And a theme that I notice from a lot of our guests is that there seems to be, regardless whether someone's a fundraiser like myself or whether someone's a foundation president like yourself or a program officer and everything in between, that there seems to be this constant theme of being very close to having a lived experience that is very close to the experiences of the grantees. And as I talk to non-Black professionals in the sector of philanthropy, I don't often find the predominance of this connection to incarceration or homelessness or food insecurity or poverty, single motherhood, a single parenthood, whether it's a mother or father, single parenthood. So it's a reoccurring theme that I notice for a number of our professionals, Black professionals in the sector of philanthropy. And I wondered, from your perspective, if you think that for Black professionals who don't come from wealth, don't come from generations of foundational family foundations, do you think that Black people who do come from lower income backgrounds and some of the challenges that are reflective of some of the experiences of the grantees that are being funded, is there some unique insight that Black professionals with these experiences have that you think is valuable? Because part of the reason why I'm asking this question is because we're also living in a year where people have lost their jobs, a federal job that was mission focused, that they might be feeling lost right now. There might be people in college who are trying to think through their next steps. And there's this sense of powerlessness and hopelessness that a lot of people are feeling in many ways, but also as it relates to their profession and their career and their call. All that to say is, do you think that there is room, a place for Black people, people of color in the space of the sector of philanthropy? And is there something valuable to the insight for those of us who do come from single parent households or come from low income families, that is also valuable to the sector of philanthropy as a professional?
Yeah, I think it certainly does provide a perspective, but I'm cautious in saying that that perspective is not always productive, because if you came from that background, like many of us have, and you are still traumatized by that background, and going into those communities as a program officer or someone or someone else triggers some of those same feelings and some of that same trauma, that can manifest itself in how a grant review is facilitated. And so I think we have to have a high degree of emotional intelligence when it comes to those things, managing our own. It's like I was saying earlier about managing, tempering my own emotions when I show up, so that I can be objective, so that I can listen, that I can hear, and then offering those perspectives in the appropriate manner. And I think black black philanthropic professionals, particularly when it comes to our communities, sit in a place where they're going to have to do some of that same internal management. It could be that so that's on the negative side. On the positive side, so to speak, it could be that an organization, a nonprofit, shouldn't get a grant, but because you understand that community, because you so want to help that organization, you might make not the best decision. I don't think any of this is rocket science. I think philanthropic organizations can do both things. You can have good requirements and guidelines and everything else, and bring grantees along and prepare them for a more significant gift. But I do think that we have to balance our own interpersonal sort of experience and history in that perspective as we show up at the table. I think where it is helpful, Michelle, is that I think if you come from that kind of background, you have an appreciation for how hard it is. You have an appreciation. And I think that's slightly different than perspective. Because while from a professional standpoint, this may not be the best well-written grant or might not be the best well-spoken person, but that's Miss Barbara. That's the neighborhood association president. You've got context when that person's sitting, because that's my mom, right? That's my mom, the phlebotomist of 40 years, sitting up advocating for her community. And maybe she's not using the right language. She'll say it to me all the time, Darrin, I don't know the language. I just know what I mean. And I said, okay, you say what you mean, mommy. And so there's an appreciation for where people are coming from. And I think that should never be lost in how we do our work and how we show up and protecting those who are trying to advocate and do the things that they want to do for themselves. We are a proud people. And it takes a lot for a person who wants to work in their communities and do the right things in their communities to come to a grant maker, particularly in our palatial buildings and everything else, not knowing the language, not knowing all of those things, and say, I need your help. I need your help. An appreciation for where they come from, an appreciation for who you are will get you beyond that initial sort of shock and awe or whatever it is to say, okay, auntie, because that's who you're looking at, or okay, uncle, let's sit down and talk about what you need. You kind of hear between all the other things that manifest themselves, and you give that person a chance. And I think that's the real power of our history, is that appreciation and that empathy and that open heart to say, I'm gonna walk you through this process. As for people from the government who might be losing jobs, look, there's a place for you. Call me. Because those experiences, like I feel about the military, civil servants are in the same position: diverse, fast-paced, empathetic, bilingual in terms of being able to talk to different levels of maybe wealth in an organization or whatever else. I absolutely think that there's room and opportunity if philanthropy will embrace it. Call me.
Darrin, what's the best way to connect with you?
It's easy. If you Google Darrin Goss, no, I'm just kidding. There are a few Darrin Gosses out there, but I guess the best and quickest way is to just email me. And you might think it's crazy, but I do check my email. Uh, and then Cindy will check the email as well. But Darrin at coastalcommunityfoundation.org. I'm on all the social channels except X. I don't do X. So you can find me on Facebook. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on what's the other one?
Instagram.
So I'm out there. I'd love to connect, love to hear your stories. If I could be helpful to you, I'd like to be, and I'm certain that there are those of you that I don't know that can teach me a whole lot to help me get better at what I do. So yeah, I'd love to connect.
Well, Darrin, we are so grateful for you. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for helping us to be reminded that we have to be mission focused, that it is obligatory for us at this point. And for all of us who admired you prior to this episode, I'll speak for me personally, the fact that you refer to your mother as mommy, it only makes you that more awesome. Is there anything that you want to say to our community before we scram today?
No, I just say to you, Michelle, thank you for doing what you're doing, for giving voice to people like me, to encourage people like your audience to continue this work, to continue our long history and legacy of success and courage. Sometimes it doesn't feel that way, but I think you act as a reminder, and you're giving opportunities for people to see witnesses for what is possible for people who look like us. And I just greatly appreciate you doing that. That's why I had no problem after our first conversation saying yes to this. I think what you're doing is very important for the field and for our country. So thank you.
You know, Darrin, you said, what this podcast does for the country, I never really thought of it in terms of that. It's interesting. I just started this podcast, and I'm pretty open about it out of a sense of loneliness, that I think that the sector of philanthropy can be a lonely place. And I think for those who come from the fundraising side of philanthropy, that philanthropy can be a very lonely and a really harsh place. And so part of what I was hoping to do for our listeners is just to be that reminder that they're not alone in this work. And regardless of their race, regardless of their gender, regardless of their industry, that there is a community that can love them, support them, be there for them, and that you also offer that up through your own sense of mentorship and leadership, that they can email you, and Cindy will be seeing those emails too, so people be mindful of that, I think is awesome. So thank you for your love for this community. And thank you for your leadership. We need it. We really, really need it right now.